Hi everyone, I am Cassandra Beckworth and I'm joined here with Jen Rosato tonight. We're going to be talking about some collaboration options in the program and stereotype threats. So we're going to walk you through some different options that you have in the online program with the online PD. And the collaboration options that we're going to be talking about, while they may be helpful to everyone in hybrid and online, they're specifically going to be for the online program and the create tasks that you're going to be talking about. I'm also going to share an agenda with you in the chat, so you can look for that link there, and we're going to go through that and progress our way through it. And I'm going to turn it over to Jen and let her say hi to you guys.
Thanks, Cassie. So I'm Jennifer Rosato, and I am one of the project leads for Mobile CSP. I am a professor of computer science here at the College of St. Scholastica, which is in Duluth, Minnesota, and have been working with the Mobile CSP project for a number of years. And I am, like Cassie said, going to walk you through some of the collaboration options that are specific to our online participants. Hybrid folks, you're probably still going to get some useful information out of it because the options I give you are options you can give to your students as well. But your hybrid sites may have you working in a slightly different manner in terms of asking you to collaborate more intensely than we might with our online participants. And then because the stereotype threat materials were not up in a timely manner last week for our online group, I'm going to walk through those. Hybrid folks, your master teachers will be going through those with you later this week. I'm just going to do a quick high-level overview, and so it might set the stage for you and give you some things to think about before you get to your professional development when you talk about stereotype threat later in the week. All right, I am going to share the screen, my screen, and we're going to go through the first part on collaboration, and then we're going to take a pause and allow some time for you to ask questions if you've got questions about the collaboration options. And so I will, Cassie will be monitoring the watch page. You can put questions in that chat window, and then we can answer them at that point. And we'll take time for questions at the end as well after the stereotype threat part of the presentation. So, as you're probably well aware by now, the Computer Science Principles class has 2 performance tasks. If you are having students submit the AP exam, they'll have to submit 1 create performance task and 1 explore performance task. During the summer here, for the online participants, you are going to complete a performance task as well. So you get to put in the same position that your students are going to during the year. During the professional development in terms of our schedule, in week 2, we're going to ask you to review the performance task directions and information and find a partner. In week 3, we're going to ask you to develop your app pictures. Oh, I think I have a little typo there. I think you actually want to do your app pitches in week 2. My apologies. I'll double check the scheduling and make sure we've got it correct for you in the pacing guide. But do your storyboards, begin building and start your begin building your app and start documenting your information in your portfolio. And then the final week, you want to test and refine your app, complete building it, finish off your portfolio, and present your work. So we're taking an extended 3-week schedule here for you to get through the create performance task because we know it's overwhelming to go through all of the lessons that you're being asked to go through right now. A little bit lighter tasks in week 2 and week 3. Week 4, we're going to be going through fewer lessons in the curriculum, and so you should have more time to spend on finishing building your app at that point. We really want to emphasize to you that this is an iterative development process. So even though our suggested process looks very linear, that you start with a step 1, 2, 3, etc., that you may have to go back and revisit pieces of it as you work on building it and refining your app. So the for the performance task in the create one here, while you're building your app, ideally you want to think about some kind of problem that you have, that your community has, that you see around you, and think about a way that an app might help to solve that problem. So a little brainstorming in that area. And then the next step is going to be to pitch your app. There's a suggested template for how you could write out a sentence for pitching your app in the create performance task instructions for the students there. The pitch is really just about getting feedback from others in terms of thinking about, oh, I would use that app. No, I don't think I would use that app. Or, how are you going to build that part of it? So it's just an opportunity to kind of put your idea out there and get an initial set of feedback from folks. Also, your master teacher at that point will be able to say to you, yeah, you're probably going to have a really difficult time getting that done. Why don't you focus on this part of it? Or I don't think that's possible to build an app inventor, or thumbs up, great job. That sounds like it'll be a great app for your great performance task. All right. The next step is really to do some designing of your app, and we have some storyboard mock-up templates that you can use as a part of that. So this is really a focus on designing the user interface and thinking about what user interface components you want to include in your app there. And then the next step is to start building it and then testing it, and you kind of want to go through that process over and over again. So build and then test, build and then test, just adding a feature or two at a time. So that you're not taking on too much at one point and then completely breaking your app and having a hard time trying to figure out where to fix it. We'd encourage you to document your process in your portfolio along the way so that you are not stuck trying to write your portfolio right up at the very end. You know, I'm sure you say these kinds of things to your students, but we'll just emphasize it with you as well. So keep working on it throughout the process. So why are we asking you to collaborate during the professional development? I know many of you picked online PD because you have a lot of other commitments during the summer, or scheduling is difficult for you. We do want to require you to do one part of the curriculum this summer that is collaborative, because it is one of the computer science principles, computational thinking practices. And we want to make sure that you get some experience with collaboration before you have to teach it to your students. It'll also provide an opportunity for you to develop some deeper connections with another member of your professional learning community. All right. So to that end, we want to provide you with some flexible collaboration options. And again, these are things that the College Board also lays out in the Purple Exam Book, things that are very similar to this, and so you can use these with your students if you want to as well. And they're going to go from the most intensive to the least intensive. So the first one here is to actually use a pair programming model. So you and your partner would get together and you would decide on an app that you're going to build together. All right, so you're going to build the same app. You might meet regularly via Hangouts or Zoom or Skype, that kind of thing, where you can share your screen with each other, and you would take turns as the driver and the navigator, maybe passing files back and forth in order to be able to do that, or one meeting somebody's the driver, the next meeting the other person is the driver. So this is one where you really spend a lot of time together. You have to have schedules that match up, and you should be comfortable using the Hangout or the Zoom or the Skype technology to be able to, share your screen and communicate with each other effectively in that way. All right. Second option is what I'll call a taking turns model, and I've heard of a couple of teachers using this. So you would meet at the beginning of the project and brainstorm and select an app idea. And again, you're going to build the same app in this one, but you're going to code it separately. So one person might start the coding and say build the initial user interface, and then they would share the AIA file with their partner via email. And then the partner would open it up, add some code to it, and then they would share the file, download and share the file back to the other partner. So you won't have to meet as often at the same time. You probably want to have a couple of meetings together to talk about the app that you're building and what it looks like and how it's coming along. But it's less time intensive in terms of having to be together at the same time, and it gives you some more flexibility in your scheduling. I would say or suggest that you should be able to express yourself well in emails as you're sending the files back and forth and being able to describe what you did to the app or what questions you still have. And finally, the last one here, which is the least intensive, is what we're going to call the feedback buddy model or the testing buddy model. You're going to create separate apps, but be like a sounding board for each other and give each other feedback on those apps. So you would share your initial project ideas, your pitch, that kind of thing, and give each other specific feedback on them. You'd be each other's kind of go-to person. If you're getting errors in your app, you might send it over to the other person and they could take a look and give you some feedback about where they think it might be going wrong. And then you would provide testing for each other. So if you say, okay, I think I've got the core of my app done, can you test it out and try to see how well it works? Then that person would take it, do the testing, and give you feedback on it. This one is going to require the least amount of schedule overlap, but it does mean that you should be able to express yourself well in emails. All right. So those are the 3 collaboration options. And again, the idea here is that we want you to have some kind of flexible experience, but to have an experience where you do have to collaborate in the professional development so that you get some more understanding of that as a computational thinking practice. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll check in here with Cassie and see if we've got any questions from the audience. Oh, Cassie, you sound muted to me. I don't know if you are. Slight technical difficulties. I'm just going to check in with Cassie via the chat window here. Okay, so sounds like there's no questions coming in yet. So I will go back and we will start talking about the stereotype threat part of the presentation. If you think of questions, however, as we're going along and you didn't get a chance to ask them yet, feel free, and Cassie will pass them along to me in the chat window. So we'll get them asked here, even if you can't hear Cassie. And maybe you can hear her, but I'm the only one who can't. So let me share my screen again. All right. So the second part of the presentation is on stereotype threat. And the reason that we talk about this is with the course Computer Science Principles, we have a goal of broadening participation in the field of computer science in general and wanting to make sure that we're reaching students that are typically underrepresented in computer science. That includes women as well as minorities and people with disabilities. So stereotype threat is a phenomenon that underrepresented people may experience when they are not the majority in a situation, all right? Stereotypes are common and they're out there and they can sometimes be really useful. And so they're not always a bad thing, but when we talk about computer science and we talk about some of those underrepresented students, it can cause some problems. So students feel at risk of conforming to stereotypes about the groups that they might belong to, and that has to do with how they perceive themselves and how others perceive them. So if I think for a minute about myself as a female in the computer scientist role, I might be worried about my poor performance, meaning that I'm conforming to the stereotype that women are not very good at computer science, right? And so I'm always worried about, is my performance good enough? Does it meet the standards? Can I be considered a computer scientist? All right. There are some specific things that happen to learning for students that have been measured with stereotype threat. So it can hinder their academic performance. So one example might be if you ask students about their gender on an exam before they take the exam, that it hinders their performance, that they actually have lowered grades. If you save that question for later or don't ask it at all, then the performance between men and women on that math exam starts to even out, and women actually perform much better than when they had been asked that question in the first place. So asking the question triggered stereotype threat for them and then decreased their performance. It might also affect students' choices and aspirations. So if you are not able to think about yourself as a computer scientist, if you can't see yourself in that role, you may not aspire to a career that has anything to do with technology. Even students who are in the CS Principles class, if you're not specifically talking to them and saying, hey, you're doing a great job at this, you really could be, could major in computer science, that kind of thing. Sometimes they just need that external reinforcement in order to help them see that they can make those choices in terms of going down that career path or aspiring to something in that area. It also leads to harsh personal standards, as I was talking about earlier, in terms of thinking about, like, am I doing well enough? And if I'm not doing well enough, I might want to opt out of the class or opt out of the major. One common thing that I hear from students in my undergraduate courses is that the women are often thinking that they're performing at an average level or a below average level, when in fact some of them are performing at the top of the class. So I often try to share with students the kind of the spread of grades on exams, that kind of thing, not pointing out anybody in particular, but so that they can kind of recalibrate and understand where they fit within the course and that they really are doing quite well. It also has effects on your short-term memory and your creativity, so that you're not able to remember as much, and it depresses your creativity, and then it just leads in general to a negative attitude towards computer science. Okay, so that's a little bit about kind of the social science behind stereotype threat there. I'm going to talk more about it in the classroom, because that's where you all are going to be dealing with it for the most part. So there's unconscious behaviors and unconscious things that are in the environment that can trigger it. It could be a gender imbalance. So when the student walks in and sees that they're the only female or the only student of color in the classroom, or one of two in the classroom, that can trigger stereotype threat immediately for them. They may not recognize that that's what's going on or happening, but it can do that to them. There's also stereotypes that might show up in the physical space in the classroom, and we have a pedagogy lesson about this later on, where you learn how to make some adjustments to your physical space. And then if the teacher or someone in the classroom calls attention to the gender of the student, that can trigger stereotype threat as well. And not just gender, race too, I would say. So if you have ever said something to a student like, well, what do girls think about apps like this? That immediately puts the student on the spot in terms of thinking that they need to represent their entire gender or their entire race. And it reminds them that they may not belong in that environment. So as much as possible, you want to avoid those kinds of statements. We're going to talk just a little bit about some interventions that you can do in the classroom. A lot of these we've tried to embed to some degree, either in the pedagogy lessons or in just the lesson plans themselves. So the first one is this idea behind fixed versus growth mindset. And so you want to emphasize a growth in intelligence, that even if you don't know it now, you can learn it, and that people can learn this with hard work and with smart studying strategies. It is possible for anyone to be a computer scientist and for anyone to succeed in the class. So one of the pedagogy lessons will go into more depth about what growth mindset is, and you may have heard of that, heard that phrase or term before. Your school may have done some work on this already. You also want to normalize struggles, and I'll say hopefully your master teachers are using some of these interventions with you, especially if you're new to computer scientist or computer science, and you're building your first apps here over the last week, or starting to build them this week, and you're struggling and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is harder than I thought it would be. Yeah, sometimes it can be. So it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to encounter roadblocks. The key is that you want to keep trying and keep pushing, and that you keep going, that you don't give up. All right. And I think as a teacher, you can provide that information to students in a way that in a way that is relevant and helpful for the whole class. So sometimes you might introduce a lesson and you can say, now we're going to talk about cryptography today. Cryptography can really be a difficult topic, but we can all get it. It might be hard and it might take us a while, but we're all going to get it. All right. So if you normalize that idea that students might struggle with it, then they don't feel so down about themselves, feeling like they don't understand the material when they get to that part.
Jen, can you hear me now?
I can. Oh, that's awesome, Cassie.
Yay! So I just want to cut in really quick. We have a question coming in from Jeremy, and he says that he has a habit of saying guys, like it's a general plural when he's talking to his class. Can we tell him some background on whether or not that falls into calling attention to gender, and maybe some suggestions about how to curb that?
That is a good point. That is something that I think many people are guilty of, regardless of their gender. Like I find myself saying that because it's just a habit at some point, and women and men say that alike. I would like to try to encourage you to avoid using the term guys. I think there are substitute terms you could use, like students. How about our programmers in class today? So I think if you could kind of come up with a couple of words you could use as alternatives to guys, that would probably be the best if you can. Yeah, folks, there you go. Students, folks, scholars. You could use some aspirational terms in there too. So yeah, great question.
And this isn't a question, but it got me thinking about some common things that come up too, is when you're coming up with examples in your class too, you want to make sure that you're using topics that are broadly appealing to lots of different students. So don't consistently use sport examples, or don't consistently use pop media culture examples. Make sure you mix it up a little bit when you're talking about different things, so your topic's appealing to lots of different students in your class.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's absolutely okay to use sports as an example in your classroom, but like Cassie said, just mix it up. Next time, use an art example or something like that that really to, a different, just a wide variety of topics, because, stereotypes are assumptions we're making about groups. But when you think about all the men that I bet some men that are not into sports and that are really into art and are very creative, or women who are very into sports as well. So the stereotypes don't hold true for the entire population. So as much as you can do to, as Cassie was saying, find examples that will be broadly appealing and mix those examples up, that's perfect.
Just wanted to share an example that one of our teachers shared here in the chat when talking about general plural words that you can use to talk to your class, and they had the suggestion of coming up with a term that you call your students. So she gave the example of wolves or something like that. So you get in the habit of calling them that. So that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go back to screen sharing just so I can post those interventions here one last time. And I think we stopped at normalizing struggles. The last one was providing wise the next one was providing wise feedback. When you give feedback to students, I would really focus a lot on, what are the learning objectives for that lesson, and what is the process that you're really wanting them to focus on. So when you give them wise feedback, you want to hold them to a high standard in terms of saying, look, we want to have really good documentation in our programs so that other people can read it. I know that you can write really good documentation, but this particular project is not up to those standards because you're missing comments for your procedures. All right, so it's really specific. It tells the student that you believe in them and that you're going to hold them to a high standard, and that you'll help get them there, that you'll help make sure that they understand how to do it. All right, those are kind of some of the key components there in providing wise feedback. That you're helping them, holding them to a high standard, and then specific directions on fixing it. Okay. Another one is self-affirmation of values. There's actually a specific activity that you can do with students, and I will make sure it gets linked in our Stereotype Threat lesson plan here in the next day or two. But as much as possible, if you're talking with students and they're feeling down about their performance in the course or something like that, you could talk to them a little bit about why they took the course in the first place, what's important to them in general, and how taking the course reinforces those values. So maybe somebody is really interested in a social justice angle and wants to make a difference in the world, and this is their way to do that. Or maybe somebody is really focused on their family and being able to provide for their family in the future. Well, you can say, make that connection to careers and how, jobs are well paying here. All right. So, but thinking about what's important to the student and having them articulate what those values are actually reinforces their motivation for being in the course. Another example is to provide non-stereotypical role models. So if you think about bringing in a speaker to your classroom, or the posters that you put up in the room, or the people that you talk about as far as who computer scientists are, you want to make sure that you are including not just the stereotypes like Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates for role models in computer science, but that you're also looking outside of the box to those other folks who may not typically be considered. So talking about Ada Lovelace, the Grace Hopper, things along those lines where it's a woman. And then there are African-American men that are involved in computer science making a difference. So as much as possible to make sure that you're providing role models where students can see themselves in a computer scientist role. And then finally creating a welcoming physical space. So things like Star Wars posters where you kind of have an in crowd that knows about Star Wars or Star Trek and an out crowd that doesn't know about it. And if you feel like you're a part of that out crowd, then that physical space may not feel so very welcoming to you. When we were talking earlier about, like the socially useful apps and, making a difference in the world, if you're able to show what computer scientists can do in a broad set of areas, examples of how it impacts sports, how it impacts art, how it impacts music, how it impacts science, that kind of thing, whether it's through posters or news articles that you're putting up in your physical space in your classroom, that's going to be more welcoming to students, and again, help them kind of see and visualize themselves connecting it to their interests and seeing themselves using computer scientists in that way. Computer science, sorry, not computer scientists. So those are some of the interventions, and I will stop screen sharing and go back to the hangout here. Let me, oops. See if I can find my, oh, there it is. Okay, do we have more questions coming in there, Cassie?
Not at this time, but I think we'll give it a couple seconds for people to catch up with us.
Sure.
I know there's about like a 10-second lag.
Yeah, and absolutely ask questions about the collaboration piece if you didn't get a chance to do that earlier. We can talk about both of those. And,
Here's a question. Oh, sorry, Jen.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of framing the discussion, stereotype threat and bias and equity issues are difficult conversations. I encourage you to talk with your master teacher and the other teachers as well as in here, and just just start having that conversation, right? Yeah, it's difficult, but go ahead and start and just dive in.
Great suggestion, Jen. We have a question coming in here that says, would you say the layout of the room has an impact on student collaboration?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So if you think about how your desks are set up and arranged in the room, and whether or not it easily facilitates collaboration, that can definitely have an impact. I teach in a couple of rooms where the desks are arranged in rows and they just go back in the room. First of all, it's difficult for me to walk around and observe the students in that space. It's difficult for them to rearrange themselves and work with anyone except for the person that's right next to them. So, some things that I've seen when I've observed computer science classrooms, if you have desks that you can put, 4 in a group or 6 in a group or something like that, then you've got some options for collaboration, whether it's with the person straight across for them or their elbow partner, that kind of thing. If you have movable desks where students can move around and you've got laptops that they can use on there, those are great options. I mean, I understand you got to work with the environment that you've got. And so to think creatively about what you might be able to do with that space. I would also say, just from a classroom management standpoint and using technology, that as much as possible, if you can do your lesson prep and kind of your housekeeping details for the day when students are not even on the computer, that helps them keep focused on what it is they're about to learn, and then you can dismiss them to the computer to do stuff, so.
Great, thank you, Jen. Those are great suggestions. So we're still waiting here. I'm going to give you guys a couple more seconds to answer any questions you may have.
I'll also point out, maybe while we're waiting, if there's any questions coming in. I know we have some teachers that are teaching mobile CSP online to their students. The kind of suggestions that we gave you for ways that students could collaborate in an online environment that you're using this summer, those should work for your online students too. So if you're worried about how will they collaborate together, you can use those examples as a way for them to get started on that process too. And we have some experienced online mobile CSP teachers that if you ever want to talk about what that looks like, let us know. We'll connect you.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing anything else coming in. So if you guys have any questions that weren't addressed, you can look to your master teacher about that. They should be talking more about Stereotype Threat in this week's meetings. And then as we work our way into the create task, you'll learn more about the collaboration options. So you can feel free to reach out to them. Jen, is there anything that you want to add last minute here before we exit out?
Just for the folks that are in the online PD, if you didn't notice under the create performance task information, there's a link to a document that explains, that's what we're doing week 1, week 2, 3, and 4 in the PD, and then has the links to the slides again for the collaboration options. So make sure you kind of take a look through that. And again, you're only doing 1 performance task this summer. Because of the time constraints, we didn't want to, around trying to collaborate, we didn't want to force you to try to do 2 of them. So.
Great, thank you, Jen. And a friendly reminder that next week we're not going to have an optional team webinar, but then you guys can look for us back on week 3 when you come back from your break for the online people. Hybrid might hold something that you guys would be invited to, but the online team won't be hosting anything. So. Thank you guys for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your night. If you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to us.
Have a good evening. Thanks, Cassie.